Hey, welcome back, everybody. Of course, this is Dr. Keith McNally, and this is the Question Guy podcast. And I'm here with Portia Louder, and this is the first conversation I've ever had with somebody who's been to prison. And she wrote a book about it, and it's right here, Living Louder. And we're here to talk about all of that because I've read, to be quite honest, Portia, I've read through this book twice, and I didn't know what to think of it. It's a heart-wrenching book. You talk about the why, what happened. You even mention things that went on before the why of you going, of course, to prison. And your life wasn't the best. And I don't know if you want to give us some clues as to inside of all that, but it's like the time that you spent in prison seem to be necessary for you. And we're just going to isolate this conversation. It's all about you. It seemed to be that wake up call that many of us need to have to say, there's more to life. And I think your mom, what was it that you wrote in your book that your mom said? Because, you came home just, it wasn't the best. I think it was your young son at the time who was just kind of waiting at the window and what was it that your mom had said? Do you remember?
Yes, I do, real very clearly. My mom looked at me and she said, I don't know what it would take for you to change your life because
Okay.
if this isn't enough for you, what would it be?
And I really think that be because there's a lot of talk about how the universe works, because she spoke it, it's out there now. Things just kind of, went on their way and it happened. Something happened to you that caused you to change your life.
Yes.
So let's talk about that. And you don't have to go into any detail that you don't want to, but who were you prior to going to prison?
Yeah. Well, I have a few different lives, but as a young girl, I really struggled. I'm the oldest of seven kids. I struggled knowing who I was, having any direction. Our home was really non-conforming. I mean, there were a lot of fun things about it. It was creative. It was fun, but there was no structure.
Okay.
And so by the time I was 13, I mean, for example, if you wanted to go to school, you could. If you didn't want to go to school, you didn't have to. So, like, I
That
was
is no
the,
structure.
yeah,
Okay.
if you wanted to brush your teeth, you could, right? And
Okay.
so when I was 13, I really started struggling with relationships. Like, that was my first struggle. So I was dating boys that were like 16, 17 years old and dropped out of school, ended up getting pregnant young, ended up drug addicted. So my younger years were really
At
rough.
at 13, 14?
No, I was pregnant when I was 17.
Okay.
And at that point I was, dropped out of high school,
Mhm.
moved into low income apartment and just took care of my son and really just thought that if I could find a man, then my life would be okay. And so I married someone that was 10 years older than me. So I was 18, he was 28.
That's
And
not your
it's not in my book,
okay.
but yeah, I didn't. In fact, I'm writing another book with a little more of that detail. But anyway, so right about that time, my dad got transferred. We lived in a really small town. So, I mean, I had never been on an airplane. I had never left that small town. And my dad got transferred to the city in Utah, which is Salt Lake City.
Okay.
And I came to visit my parents. And that was like the first time that I remember thinking, wow, I could get a job. Like maybe I could have a life, just really didn't know what. And so I went back and I told my husband at the time, I said, hey, we should move up to the city. And he's like, I'm never leaving this town.
Oh,
Do you want to go? Go ahead. We don't even get along, but I'm not leaving. And so I moved to Salt Lake, got a job as a photographer, and then I found out I was pregnant. So I have two children. Well, I'm pregnant with my second child, called my husband, and he said, yeah, I don't want anything to do with it. Like, we don't even get along.
okay.
So that was a lonely time for me. And I had one more thing happen after I had, well, it's not just a thing, but after I had my daughter, I was working. So I had a little bit more, I guess, self worth or confidence and started dating again. And I mean, I could say I'm bad at picking the right person, but I think, and I think that's self-evident, but I was also the wrong person. Like it was
Right.
just, I wasn't the right person. Um, and so I started dating again and I got pregnant again, which I'm sure anyone listening to this would wonder, like, didn't she know what causes that? But I seriously, like, some people struggle with infertility and I struggle with the opposite. Doesn't matter what I do, I just get pregnant. So, so anyway, this time, and I think I was 22. So you got to imagine, I mean, this is my third child and I'm 22 years old. And I remember being just terrified.
Wow.
Like I thought, I can't have another child. I can't care for it. My kids don't have a father. I don't get child support. I'm trying to climb out of this hole. And I chose adoption. And so
Or
my number third child, I gave
okay.
David up for adoption. Yeah. So that was it was a good experience. And then as soon as I had him, that is when I really started using drugs. And I just didn't know how to deal with any of this. I'd just been through too much,
Right.
So it started with prescription drugs and then escalated. And it wasn't long after, it was about a year after that I came home late one night and my oldest son was waiting for me and my mom she just looked at me and so that was a turning point for me. I mean, that truly, I hit a bottom. I climbed out of that hole. I worked hard, and did whatever I could basically to get my life on track. And
Mhm.
and I had 5 years of sobriety, married the man that I'm married to now,
And
started
that's
Chad.
Chad, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And he is in the book. And
He's
so he's one of he's a godsend. So he is like your greatest supporter.
yeah,
There aren't I don't think there are enough good words in the English language to really honor this man, faithful and so forth.
yeah.
But so you met and married, right?
Hmm.
And
And then,
then you
yes,
got into some stuff. And
yeah.
and I don't know because you do talk about it, it's part of this that whether you willingly did you willingly do something that you knew was wrong, or did you just kind of get caught up in, wow, I've got big money here, and if I could just make it, because you even say, this was $1 million deal,
Hmm.
your photography business wasn't, doing what you wanted it to do. So, and the value here is that you wanted to spend more time with your kids. You wanted to be a mom. You wanted to
Right,
have all that. And this one deal would have like kind of cemented all that, right?
right, right. Yeah, no, I think it was kind of like a perfect storm. I certainly didn't set out to do illegal real estate deals.
Right.
Um, I started out buying and flipping lots, which is totally legal.
Mhm.
But when I relapsed, like, this is what I know about myself. Like, the minute I use any kind of substance, so I am like anti-drugs. I don't care if they're prescription drugs or what they are. I just don't use anything.
Right.
And so, my judgment, I relapsed. I had a back surgery and relapsed, and I was really busy. My business was, I mean, if I showed you the calendar I was working usually, 16 hours a day, and I had nannies. So I was, here's my life. And I think part of that was that as a drug addicted single mother, and then you start building a career, like, I'm, this is a huge piece of my worth. Like, I'm thinking, I can't, I mean, I'm having more kids. So Chad and I have more kids because that's what I do. And there I am. I have this career now, and
Mm.
I don't want to give up my career. And I'm also pretty independent. I'm thinking, Chad doesn't need to support my kids and pay for their braces and everything else. I mean, he's just a single guy that didn't have a bunch of kids who graduated college, So I'm trying to pay my way. And I mean, we're doing it together, but I was just so driven by accomplishment and money. And eventually those deals came into the mix. They're equity deals. So you buy the house, you borrow more than it's worth. And there were a lot of people doing them. The market was stupid, and I got involved. The thing that I know is that internally, I remember feeling like I shouldn't do this. I mean, like when something just doesn't, now my barometer is like here, it's like, don't do that. If anyone even says something that I think is off, nope. But at the time, once I got involved, it was just I just kept getting involved. And then I mean, I was terrified. Once the FBI got involved, I was just terrified, you know?
And you kind of make that jump, and so I'm always going to refer, because I do want people to read your book. I think it's an eye-opening and it's a good book to read. You kind of make that jump that, okay, you did it, and then knock, 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 somebody's at the door, and so that's got to be in and of itself. Anybody who's got the FBI knocking at their door, got to
Yeah,
be a little frightening.
it's terrible. It's so terrible. I highly recommend not having the FBI come to your
I mean,
house.
these are not the guys in the dark black suits, but all the same.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Because I'm sure none of, well, the question is, did your husband know what you were doing? Like the illegal part of it? Or was he just, oh, you're doing your real estate thing. That's cool.
You know,
Because, well, actually, don't even answer that, because that would implicate him. Because then
no, it's okay.
I
No, no,
don't
no,
want you to
no.
go back to that's bad. Don't answer that question. Sorry.
You're the question guy. You asked the
I,
question.
I
No.
am, but it's not fair. So plead the
No,
fifth
we
that
won't
this,
talk about that. But
yeah.
the we just had some rough years.
Okay.
You know, it really took Chad a minute to accept that this was happening and to just make that decision. And he's been asked that question, you know,
Okay. Did you
like
know?
what
Yeah.
made you decide? Well, he's been asked the question, did you know? But the main thing for Chad was he reached a point where he had to make a choice. Like, do I love her? Am I willing to stand by her? And what does that mean? And what could it mean? And how far am I willing to go? And
Mhm.
he's like, once I made that decision, Chad's like a rock. He's just super solid.
Yeah, and yeah, like I said, there aren't enough words, I think, to give this guy credit.
Yeah.
All the same.
Yeah.
So you're in, and I got to read. This is really cool. This is a really cool part of the book. And
Yeah.
for those, it is. And I'm on page 29, and this, and in the middle of page 29, I might not read all of it. So there's a big paragraph here, and it starts with standing in front of a group of 60 women in the lobby of the treatment housing unit. I said, "Hi, my name is Portia Lowder, and I was asked to speak about a class we offer in education called Explaining Your Conviction." That's exactly what you call it. I
Yep.
guess it's exactly what it's called. I think I have the credentials to stand before you today because I'm a drug addict. I'm now a felon. I did use the word, but only
Mhm.
because you used it. But these are just a few of my titles. I am also the oldest of 7 children, 7 kids, and the mother of 5 children. So you have a massive family of origin. You have a massive family of your own. And here you are in federal pen,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And I think based on where it is in the book, this is where you start changing. I don't, am I right? This is where your thinking starts to change. You're taking ownership now of you.
Mhm.
You're taking responsibility of what you did. And now you see some potential of I can help.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what's going on here?
It is. It's interesting. I was asked the question this morning just on a Facebook message that said, what was the number one most important mindset shift for you to get through what you went through?
Hmm.
And I said, well, first, I had to know who I am. I had to know what my purpose was
Yeah.
because I had to have something to fight for. And I think that this is where I started figuring out what I had to fight for, like
Yeah.
who I really am and what my purpose was. I think if you know your purpose in any situation, you can get through it.
Actually I wrote about it, so I totally agree. But I think this was that moment that nothing changes overnight, so it becomes a part of you, but you were given the opportunity to share your story,
Right.
and that's always critical. And I'm all about story. I'm all about sharing story. That's why I do this podcast, is because when you hear somebody else's story, you can relate to it. And when you can relate to it, you begin to relate and understand the person.
Right.
And then when you do that, you realize that there's something connecting us as people. And that's what you found here. Because, well, I don't want to tell your story because you start connecting with people. You start connecting with the other inmates.
Oh
They're no
yeah.
longer numbers on
Right.
on your back. They're people with faces and names.
And that is my greatest hope, is to connect people to the
Yeah.
humanity of the people I met, because you
Yeah.
can't demonize people when you know their story.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah.
So tell us some of the stories. And there's a prison cake in here somewhere. And and there's a link somewhere on the World Wide Web that I want to put to the description because that's part of your story.
Yeah, I'll send it.
Because
Have you seen it
I
yet?
have
No.
not, but
Okay,
there's a
I'll
video. Well, I can go to it because at the end of the book you talk about it and you give the URL for it. But I do
yeah.
want, so that's part of your story. But tell us this some of the stories that are really important to you as you made the transition to figure out your purpose. Can you do that?
Yeah. I think in the book, one of the first stories that I tell is like Too Tall, for example. Everyone in prison has a nickname. You can imagine Too Tall was tall.
And but she became somebody who you felt safe with.
Correct. She
And
was kind. Like you would, if you saw her walking down the street, you might think, okay, I don't want to mess with Too Tall.
right.
She was just a tender-hearted, just a kind, just really kind to me. And she would sit and knit and cross stitch. So I would go set with her, and she started telling me about her life and what she had been through. And she just grew up so poor. She had nothing.
Now,
And
remind me, is she the one that spent 18 years? There was a story that somebody spent 18 years.
that's a different woman.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was in a support group. And I was blown away that a woman could spend 18 years and be filled with light and
Yeah.
hope. I was like, whoa. That's when I just started figuring out that we need to honor people that go through this, not like demonize them. But with Tutal, I'm like, okay, so here you are, this woman that came from nothing as far as education. I mean, I thought I came from nothing. No, I am taught not. I mean, I had everything. My parents weren't drug addicted. My grandparents weren't drug addicted. A lot of the people in prison that their parents. I mean, it's so common for them that their parents have served time. They serve time, and they're just raised really poor. And so Tutal had been raised with nothing, and she worked at Burger King, you know, and had nothing, got in a relationship. The guy told her when she got pregnant, you should just go get an abortion. You're ugly. I don't want anything to do with you. So she chose to keep the child and have him on her own, and started dealing drugs to make some money, because it's hard to live on Burger King wages,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you have no education. And so
But
she got
18 years, that's a lot.
no, she got a 10-year
Okay,
sentence.
10 years. That's
Yeah,
still
it's still a
because
chunk
you
of
had
change,
7
right?
years and
Right, but I come from a white collar background. I had lawyers, right? Like I had people, mine was different. And I mean, it's really hard to feel sorry for yourself when you start talking to people that had it a lot worse. Like when
yeah.
I got to prison, I thought, oh, the government did me dirty. And then I started looking around, going, oh, I was really privileged. I mean, I got to self-surrender. They didn't just lock me up and, you know,
Well, can we go back just a step then? Because at the time of again, at the time of the conviction,
mhm,
he wanted to send you
right,
right then because he
right.
had concerns. So I don't know. I wasn't at that court hearing, so I don't know. And the only story that you can give is yours. But he
Mhm.
wanted to send you there. And do you want to say why?
Yeah. In fact, everyone in the courtroom when we left just looked at me and said, well, that was like unbelievable, because he basically wanted the marshals to chain and shackle me in front of my family and take me out that day. So I wouldn't have been able to say goodbye to my kids. And my husband stood up. And, you got to imagine lawyers are going back and forth trying to
Yeah, you
discuss.
don't do that in any courtroom, and period.
No,
And that in the
no,
federal courtroom.
no. And the
He pleaded with
prosecutor,
the judge.
Yeah, my husband pled with the judge, and the lawyers were unable to make any headway with him. Like my lawyer, even the prosecutor said, "We're not asking for that." And I mean, the news is in the back because it was just one of those cases.
Mhm.
And my husband stands up and he's just standing there crying, like he can't even speak. And then he says, "Please don't do this to her. Please give her the time to say goodbye to her kids." And it was like a really powerful moment because the judge stopped and everyone in the courtroom just sat there and
What do
they
you want to
just,
tell? Do you want to, because you wrote about it. So do you want to
yeah,
say why the judge wanted to take you away then? He
yeah,
actually had concerns for your well-being.
yeah. And that's understandable based on the way I had been and responded. Like it really was a shock to me. I was in very much in denial prior to going into the courtroom. And so when he sentenced me to 84 months, 7 years, I have a 7-year-old daughter. Now I am not suicidal and never have been. So in my mind, I'm like, what is he thinking? Like what's he thinking? But in his mind, he's thinking, you have not accepted the seriousness of your situation, and
Mhm.
I fear for your life. And I
No, he
feel like
feared that you would
I
take
would
your
take
life.
my own
Yeah,
life.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
And
what you said. Yeah.
right. And so for that reason, he thought, let's take her into custody today. So yeah, Chad, I feel like I paid too much money for attorneys. Should have just
But
had Chad represent me.
that would have been some. But
Yeah.
the way you presented it, I don't know if this is word for word, but the way you presented it, as soon as he did, I think well, the way you said it, the next sentence is, I'll give you 8 weeks, two
That's
months, I'll
right.
give you 8 weeks. It was
Yeah.
like, okay,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'll
that's
give you
what I
time.
mean. Like it was a really and Chad, he's pretty humble. Like he's not the kind of guy that's gonna so for him to say something, it's like he's not aggressive. He's not like you need to get. He's just like pleading for me, and I think that that was really powerful in the room. I really do. Like
Yeah, you can imagine. Yeah.
yeah, his sister, everyone in the room just said, "Whoa." Like it just went from one extreme to the other. So what a blessing. And I think that was such a powerful moment for me because I just didn't know if I would. I mean, I felt like I was on stable ground mentally. I've talked to grown women that like curled up in a ball and sobbed for days after your sentence. It's a very painful process.
Mhm.
You really feel like my whole country's against me. Like you just feel so alone. And so for Chad to stand there, I just knew we were going to get through it. That was a really powerful moment for me to see who he really is. So,
I liked, and again, I'm picking at the story because there's some really powerful moments here. Because again, we're talking about our humanity, and when it was time for you to have visitors for the first time, one of your, I want to say colleagues and one of the inmates, but
coworkers, right?
one of your coworkers said that this is going to be difficult. She
Right.
actually told you, she said you're going to feel like on top of the world when they're here, but
Mhm.
when they go, it's going to hurt.
Right.
Can you
And
talk to that?
it's impossible to describe that kind of pain.
Okay.
I mean, and anyone that's been through it knows, but it took me 3 or 4 months I mean, it was devastating to walk into the prison, to finally find my bearings and start building a life. I was so excited to see my family, and I felt so much like me again. It's like you lose a piece of yourself. You're in prison. You're wearing the
Yeah.
same clothes. You're losing a piece of your identity. It's actually a piece of my identity that was nice at a certain point to bury and move forward and build something new. But at the time, to have my family back, I thought, I can't breathe. Like it took me weeks to recover when they left.
Mhm.
More devastating than I can describe. It was just heartbreaking for me. So,
When did you start to journal? Because I talk about that in a lot of things that I do as a necessary part of just being human.
yeah.
And I
Yep.
talk about that in my leadership, uh, coaching and training.
Hmm.
You do a lot of journaling, and you show it. You
Hmm.
actually, so how has that always been, or was it something you picked up?
No. That whole book is pretty much from journal entries. And, what happened for me was that because I was on the Utah 10 o'clock news, as I walked out of the courthouse and they pronounced my sentence on the news that
Uh,
night, we sat there because I did get to come home and we watched it on the news. And the next day, I mean, I had been just crying, just heartbroken. And the next morning I got up. I wasn't a social media person or anything. And I wrote a message on social media, and and I kind of felt like, well, what do I have to lose? Like, they're going to say what they're going to say. And I just said, I'm devastated. I just received 7 years in federal prison. I knew that was a possibility. I didn't expect it to be that way. Please support my husband and my children while I'm gone. You guys are, going to be the people that'll be there for them. And the response was incredible. Like, I had school teachers and principals and social worker. I mean, people, just friends, and the post got shared. And then I had some people say, we would love to hear how you, I mean, this is so cool to me. This is the positive side of what can happen in a hard situation. To have the kind of support that I had, it was like, why don't you share your experiences on a blog? So I did. I set up a blog, and I started keeping track of everything I felt during that time. And it was really born out of total pain. I was just in this agony, and I needed to share kind of what I was going through. And so I started that. And I was able to continue doing it while I was in prison. So I kept my own journal, and then I also blogged, and that ended up causing me some problems at times. But it was so special
Wait, the
because
blog or the journal?
the blog, yeah,
Okay.
not the
Yeah.
journal. Just
Okay.
because I actually probably used it the way I shouldn't have. Like, I just put things I knew would make officers mad, and because I was still really stubborn and frustrated. But in the end, it gave me a place to be accountable and share my feelings, and it was like I could reevaluate where I was. It was such an important part of what I went through. The letters I wrote to my kids, like, you would think it's just a letter, but it isn't. If you dig deep and you really connect, it's like you feel connected to them.
Mhm.
And yeah, it
But your
was,
kids wrote to you.
yeah,
Oh,
it was really cool. I
what
love
was that
letters.
like to receive? Go ahead.
Um, Hard and beautiful. I mean, like all things. I mean, anything beautiful has, for me, it was just like I loved the connection, but it was just painful that I hurt my kids the way that I did, and
Yeah, I'm sure
accepting.
they couldn't in any way fathom what in the world, what was going on. And that's, but as much as Chad, your husband, was supportive, they sound supportive as
Yeah,
well. I mean,
I know.
they
I don't
sound more
know.
mature than you would think. And maybe I'm reading too much
My
into it.
kids are kind of unbelievable. Like, really, I still think, especially, I mean, my two older kids, they were born to a single mom. I'm the son that I gave up for adoption. We've reconnected. I was on the phone with him last night. I mean, my life is more beautiful than it ever was before I went to prison. That's the crazy thing. The
Well,
connections,
that's the story.
that's
That
the
that's
story.
truly the story.
Right.
But your children were again more mature, very supportive.
Yep.
Even in if the writings, the letters that are in here are the ones,
Yeah.
then have they are so they are godsends because they say keep they tell you in whatever way they can just to be positive in any way you can. They don't use those words, but that is very
Yeah.
much the essence of what they're communicating.
I really do think that the majority of children that have parents that struggle, they just want their parents to be okay. You know, I mean, they might be mad and hurt, but more than anything, they want their parents to be okay. But my kids are exceptional. I mean, I say my older kids, I grew up with them.
Yeah.
They have blown me away with their strength and the way they live their lives. I couldn't be more grateful and proud. And Chad's a big piece of that. I mean, he's a really good example, and
Mhm.
you know, he's a great man. So
So let's talk about the two things. Because I want to get to why, because you talk now. You talk to, well, we'll get to that.
okay.
First the prison cake. Talk to me about the prison cake, and then we'll talk about now that you found your purpose, what
Mhm.
is your purpose and what are you doing? So
Okay.
talk to me about prison
The
cake.
prison cake. Well, you have to watch the video. The
Well, I'm good.
thing,
Yeah, okay.
the thing about the cooking in prison, everyone has the wrong idea. like there's these tender experiences that we share. And I share that in the prison video. Like it's like we all get together, and we
When I
pull.
understand that it's like a party, and it's not, because you said on Monday we have tuna fish and Tuesday
Yeah,
we have
yeah,
something else.
everything's the same, but you can buy things on commissary.
Okay.
And so like the prison cake is, it's surprisingly good, but you just pull items like you take cookies and then they have soda in them. So if you add some soda to it, it rises in the microwave. Like we have time to experiment with every ingredient that they have on
Okay.
commissary. And so the way that it works is, you make different things, and then you have these get-togethers. And I became the prison cake lady. And so I started teaching people how to make, because I made that prison cake so many times to get it right, you know? You just have a lot of time. You have a lot of time. So, yeah.
So you found your purpose. What's your purpose in life? And how are you sharing your purpose with the world?
Yeah. I, if I, if my highest value is probably connecting, like I love to connect, and I get to meet people from all different backgrounds and connect with them. So, I work with women in addiction. I go to juvenile detention centers and I speak to kids there because I want them to know who they are and what they have to fight for, you know. I had so many amazing experiences. I've had young kids come up to me and just say, "Thank you. My mom's in prison right now. I feel close to my mom today," or "I believed you. I could feel you." Because I can build credibility like in 1 second, right? Because I've been there.
You've been there.
So yeah, I mean, you go in there, you might care about these kids, and you can, I mean, if you have a much higher education, which doesn't take much when you're up against me, but I'm just saying, you won't be able to build the credibility that I can build when I walk in the room. And I can say, look, I've walked through some of these things and here I am today. So I can be the guide that it's possible to have your best life, having gone through this, and how those experiences can give you the compassion to help other people. So I do that. I go into prisons and I speak to different organizations. I love to write. I do a lot of that on social media as well. Really, I just love people. Like I really do.
Okay.
Yeah, what's that?
That's a good.
Yeah.
I
It's
mean,
better than not liking people, right?
but in order to, connect and make sure and to have that credibility, you have to be approachable, and people are going to want to hear your story because you are approachable. And
Thank you.
this kind of spells it out because this is quite literally your story. I mean, it's all of it's first person.
Mhm.
It's this is what's going on with me, my family, my friends,
Mhm.
and you even get a nickname at the end of the book.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. You have to realize, like, my life had been so busy and hectic. I mean, I started having kids when I was 17. So I grew up in prison. Like, I got to go back and have just me as the person I'm responsible for. I got to read and study and learn. I got my education and grew up in prison. So,
You
you
know what
know,
your nickname is?
the Sunshine
The
Girl.
Sunshine Girl.
And it's because I love the sun. I've never had time to sit in the sun before I went to prison. So when you asked me before we got on, you made prison sound good, and I can't even imagine that. How can that be? You enjoyed it. You asked me that, and I said,
Well, it's
and
because
in
you told
my
me that. You
yeah.
told me that in our first conversation. You said I would go, you literally said I would go back. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking, only for a reason. You're gonna only want to go back for a reason.
I wouldn't want to go back for a long time.
Right.
It was really painful
Yeah.
also. And I think that there's a case to be made for walking through pain and becoming the best version of yourself, because I experienced that. And so I loved who I became in the process of being in prison. And I loved the break I got from this chaotic world and the chance to connect and learn something new and see the world from a different perspective. And I do love sitting in the sun. I mean, if they want to send me to Victorville, California for a month, I'll go sit in the sun and read for a month. I don't want to
Perfect.
do years. I would miss my kiddos. So, but
I have no real way of ending this type of conversation because it's just because connecting with people and then having them share their story, it's a never ending process. So hopefully, once you get your next book underway, or whenever you feel comfortable in coming back, I would love to have another conversation with you. And I think all of our listeners would enjoy that too. So again, Portia, only because I want to share your book. Can you do me a favor though?
Yes.
Is this also you?
Yeah. Yeah.
So very different.
Right.
I don't know who's this person. I know it's you, but who is the person
Yeah.
in the back? Because this,
Yeah.
here you're smiling,
Right.
not so much.
Yeah.
Who is that person?
That's a person that's so burdened with the weight of the world, you know. That's the weight of an indictment, the weight of poor choices, the weight of years of garbage that I haven't processed and dealt with. It's a person that's very much in prison.
Sure.
And the end, you know, the picture in the back, the little one, that was my last picture in prison. I mean,
You
it's
want
kind
this
of,
one?
yeah, the little tiny one. I mean, there's a difference, you know, I'm free. I leave
Yeah.
prison. I'm free before I leave prison, much freer than I was before I walked in. So,
Portia, thank you so much for joining me in conversation. Of course, this is the Question God podcast, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
thanks.